Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Dani.
And we're seriously nerdy
about The Wizard of Oz. I watched The Wizard of Oz way too many times as a kid. When I was about 7, that was the VHS tape that was in the VCR all the time. We have a weird accumulation of different model kits, and we never quite know where they're going to find homes until inspiration strikes. And in this case, we thought it would be fun to recreate Dorothy's farm in Kansas, but the sepia tone version. For this build, we challenged ourselves to not buy any new equipment and instead rely on pieces that were already in our supply closet. So, Dorothy is composed of lots of different bits and pieces from a 1940s female figures kit, and Toto is originally a puppy from the livestock set. For both figures, I added green stuff to help them look more like the characters from the film. While Dorothy and Toto were setting up, it was time to start work on the farm. If you've watched this channel before, you may know that Alex and I cannot make it into an IKEA without coming out with something that's going to eventually be a diorama, and this build is no different. It's all going to fit inside of a little gold box, which gave us some constraints to design inside of. I was able to use Adobe Illustrator to model the walls and the exact dimensions that I needed to fit inside this corner, and after the base of the house was glued together, it was time to break out our coffee stirrers. Coffee stirrers remain one of the most versatile crafting tools, and I will stand by them 100%. In this case, they made incredible siding, which was perfectly to scale for the Gale house. So, we've got a corner of a house, we've got a little square that will be representing our farm, but exactly where are we at? If you, like me, have watched The Wizard of Oz too many times, you may remember at the beginning of the film, Dorothy comes running in with Toto to greet Auntie Em and Uncle Henry as they are tending to baby chicks. So, our diorama is set after the events of Oz when Dorothy wakes up back in Kansas and continues life on the farm with a newfound perspective. And maybe one of those duties is caring for the same chicks. So, if you too are a big Wizard of Oz nerd, you might recognize the side of the house here, the tire swing hanging from the old tree, and these. These are chick brooders, which are the boxes that you hold baby chicks in. That's right, chick brooders. We all learned something new today. For the tire swing, I hollowed out an existing wheel tread we had from a model kit and used my tried and true substitute for rope in miniature, which is twisted wire. Works every time. I also discovered on this build that using super glue with super glue accelerant to create your miniature trees saves you a lot of time and hassle. So we said we weren't going to buy anything new for this build, but while we were at our hobby shop, we found these tiny garden tools that were perfectly to scale, and I can't just make a tiny pitchfork out of stuff from the bits box. That would be crazy. So we bought this, but it did come with a lot of other components that aren't being used in this build and will be seen again someday. So we think it's a worthy investment. For a diorama like this, where we have one main character and a lot of other props and scenic around them, it was important to try to figure out a composition that drew the viewer's eye to the Dorothy figure, which meant that everything we place in the scene needs to be thoughtful and needs to help point to Dorothy. For the corner opposite the house, I created a quick triple rail fence using some balsa wood and some coffee stirrers, and this is going to help frame the shot of Dorothy in front of the house. It also helps the whole diorama read a little more like a farm, because what says farm more than a triple rail fence? We've been using this 1/8" MDF board because it cuts beautifully on our new Glowforge printer, but it does soak up liquid very, very quickly. So whether you're using paint or glue, it just absorbs it crazy fast. And one learning along the way was, as we laid our classic wood glue plaster mix, the MDF board started pulling the liquid out of this mixture so quickly. So we had to work very fast to get sand in place before the plaster set up on the MDF. Now I cannot wait to adopt all of these adorable livestock animals, including the bunnies that are sleeping. But for this build, we are focusing just on the chickens. Is it because I got really scared when Dorothy fell into the pig pen when I was little? Yes. Yeah, the pigs have no place in this build. They're terrifying. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's probably been a bit since you watched Wizard of Oz, but that joke really hits with the Wizard of Oz crowd, let me tell you. So everything I'm placing in terms of these tiny little props here is to serve the purpose of framing up Dorothy and creating this little moment for her and Toto as they're caring for chickens. I love that the actor dog that portrayed Toto did such a good job hopping up on objects in the film, so it seemed only fitting that Toto would be perched on this sack, and after that, it was time to place some chickens around the farm. Our approach to basing on this build was a little bit different because we wanted to lay the groundwork for that sepia tone early on to make life as easy as possible when it came time for painting. We used our traditional base of black primer before layering on a dusty tan throughout as our base color. Then we used a creamy white for a quick zenithal highlight to give a little indication of sunlight. We used reference photos and footage from the film throughout this build because the sepia tones in Wizard of Oz are incredibly rich. They're not just brown and white, they're a very warm, chocolatey brown, and the highlights are almost a peachy cream. So it wasn't as easy as just using the airbrush to base in everything with highlights and shadows and calling it good. This was only a foundation so that we'd come in with brushwork and really bring those sepia tones to life. My new obsession is Tamiya panel accent liner, which is like micro Nuln Oil and really helps you settle shading into very, very small cracks. It does leave a little bit of an oily residue, but it is beautiful for those hard to reach places that you need a little extra contrast for. For our brush on colors, I ended up using Vallejo's Smoke and MSP's Ginger Cookie, and those two different browns, a lighter and a darker, gave me a range of tones that allowed for highlights and shadows without losing any of the richness of the sepia that the film is known for. I did use a few highlights and dry brushes in Vallejo Off-White just to increase the contrast a bit, but for the most part, I really tried to focus on just using those two brown shades so that the whole build had a consistent color story. I found it really helpful to keep the base, the house, and the Dorothy figure separate so I was able to access everything while I was painting. For the Dorothy figure, I tried something I haven't done before, and that's beginning with an aggressive dry brush to bring out all of those highlighted areas and give me an extra guide as I paint the figure. And I think it worked to my benefit. I am a very impatient crafter, so painting miniature figures is not my strongest suit, but I do have fun. For the Dorothy figure, I used a lot of reference photos of Judy Garland when she's in her Kansas sepia so that I could try to capture the difference in the tones of her skin versus her dress versus her hair and reflect those in the shades of brown that I was using. I noticed in a lot of reference photos that from the distance that will be in this diorama, you can't tell that her dress has gingham checks. And gingham checks would be an absolute nightmare to try to paint at this scale, right? So obviously I attempted it anyway. My thought was to focus the gingham checks that are done well in areas that you can see them and let them fade out to areas like below the table or from the sides that viewers will not be able to see in a much faster, sloppier fashion. So if it's somewhere you can see, I spent the time and plotted out the tiny squares, and if it's not, you get little dots and dashes. It's a very theatrical approach, only spend time on what the audience will actually see. This build was a little bit different than some of our others because we had so many of the components glued down before they were even primed and painted. So for the final steps, all we really needed to do was to place Dorothy, the house, and of course, the tiny gardening tools. After that, we did a quick pass with Black 3.0 to hide the sides of the house as well as the base, and then we put it inside its little IKEA home.